All right, we're doing there'll be a slight switch in this session. When I came in on yesterday, I forget exactly who was sharing, but they were just talking about some of the legal issues and some of the legal ramifications of changes to the code as it relates to marriage and same-sex relationships and things of this nature. And I've been dealing with this issue for about a decade, and have gone from warning Christians about what was happening, why it was happening, how it was happening, and what the implications were, to now informing Christians about what happened and how it happened and what the implications are, and talking about how it is that we need to be prepared to respond to this issue. Because the way these things have come about has led to not only changes in the law, but they've also led to changes in the way even churches think about this topic of homosexuality. And I'll just give you an example of what has happened. Imagine this. Imagine I'm standing up here to preach a message about adultery, right? And as I introduce my message on adultery, I say, listen, I just want everybody to know, I love adulterers. I have friends who are adulterers. And I think that we need to be kind to adulterers. We need to embrace adulterers. And I don't think that we need, that would sound kind of odd, wouldn't it? If I was talking about pedophilia, or if I was talking about drunkenness, it would sound odd. But folks, that's the way almost every sermon on homosexuality starts today. With 1,000 excuses and explanations and apologies for what's about to come. There's a reason for that. And the reason for that is the same reason that causes Christians on the whole to not know how to not know how to deal with this issue, to not know how to think about this issue, and also to not know how to respond to this issue. Let me warn you ahead of time, not that this is going to be graphic or anything like that, although I wrestle with that. But let me warn you that we probably won't get through all of this, okay? And as far as the graphic side of it, I really wrestle with whether or not this ought to be graphic, because one of the things I believe is I believe every person, before they vote on any issue regarding same-sex whatever, needs to go to a gay parade, a gay pride parade. It's one of the most vulgar things you'll ever experience. It's nothing like the picture that's painted of the homosexual lifestyle. It's vulgar. And I will say this, if there was a heterosexual parade and we performed some of the acts that are performed in the gay pride parade, we would go to jail. Period. We would go to jail. But they don't. They don't. And I'm going to explain to you why. Listen to this from Mark Stein. In the old days, there was sodomy, an act. In the late 19th century, the word homosexuality was coined, a condition. A generation ago, the accepted term became gay, an identity. Each formulation raises the stakes. One can object to and even criminalize an act. One is obligated to be sympathetic toward a condition, but once it's a full-fledged 24/7 identity, like being Hispanic or Inuit, anything less than wholehearted acceptance gets you marked as a bigot. The transformation of a crime against nature, by the way, that's what sodomy means. Sodomy is a crime against nature. It's unnatural sexual acts. A crime against nature into a co-equal civic identity within a little more than the span of one human lifetime is one of the most remarkable victories ever achieved by any minority group in the Western world. A minority that didn't even exist in a formal sense a century ago has managed to overwhelm and overhaul a universal social institution thousands of years old. This is what happened right before the watching eyes of all of us who are alive today. Why blackness? You saw the magazine article there, Gay is the New Black. That was from The Advocate. The Advocate is the leading homosexual magazine. But why blackness? Why did they choose blackness? And it was chosen strategically, by the way, to hitch their wagon to the black civil rights movement in the United States, okay? And the gay rights movement all over the world was headquartered there, okay? But why blackness? Listen to this from that article in The Advocate. We have no natural allies, and therefore cannot rely on the assistance of any group. We have only tactical allies, people who do not want barbarous things done to us because they fear the same thing may someday be done to them. So again, they're recognizing the only way that we have allies is that somehow we equate ourselves with something else. This is from Kirk and Madsen. Russell Kirk and Hunter Madsen are two professors from Harvard University, one in marketing, the other in psychology. They wrote a book that was published in 1989. It was called After the Ball. The subtitle was How America Will Overcome Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the Decade of the 90s. The book was a propaganda strategy on changing the way people think about homosexuality. It reads today like a historical account of what happened. You have to constantly remind yourself this was written in 1989, okay? Listen to Kirk and Madsen. To suggest in public that homosexuality might be chosen is to open the can of worms labeled moral choice and sin and give the religious intransigents a stick to beat us with. Straights must be taught that it is as natural for some persons to be a homosexual as it is for others to be heterosexual. Wickedness and seduction have nothing to do with it. By the way, the overwhelming majority of Christians in church believe this. Kirk and Madsen not only didn't believe it, but according to their writing, they knew it not to be true and didn't care. It was important to their strategy that you be made to believe is true. Wickedness and seduction have nothing to do with it. And since no choice is involved, gayness can be no more blameworthy than straightness. In fact, it is simply a matter of the odds, 1 in 10, as to who turns out gay and who's straight. Each heterosexual must be led to realize that he might easily have been born homosexual himself. By the way, this 1 in 10 number, they admit in the book that it's not accurate. Yet, they refer to it as a mantra that they need to repeat, because if you repeat a mantra often enough, people begin to believe it, okay? And it just sounds more compelling to say 1 in 10. So they repeat 1 in 10. The most widely accepted study on sexual practice in the United States, for example, is the National Health and Social Life Survey. And according to the NHSLS, only 2.8% of males and 1.4% of the female population identify themselves as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. So between 1.4 and 2.8%. That's all. That's all. But the 1 in 10 mantra had to continually be repeated. And listen to this, John McKellar. He's the openly homosexual founder of a group called HOPE, Homosexuals Against Pride Extremism. So understand that this is a practicing homosexual who's saying this. The modern change in opinion concerning homosexuality, though presented as scientific advance, is contradicted rather than supported by science. A masterful public relations campaign orchestrated by the gay pride extremists has achieved a transformation in public morals consistent with widespread abandonment of the Judeo-Christian ethics upon which our civilization is based. Though hailed as progress, it is really a reversion to ancient pagan practices supported by a counterculture restatement of Gnostic moral relativism. You need to understand that homosexual practice is not new. The homosexual movement is not new. This is ancient paganism that has been repackaged. Okay? This is a religious movement. It's always been a religious movement. It continues to be a religious movement. Who are the key exponents of this gay equals black ideology? Who are the people that have been used to really promote this idea and establish it as really an undisputed fact in the minds of most people in the West? Homosexual activists, obviously. Black civil rights leaders. Black civil rights leaders in the U.S. were critical to this, because the whole world looks at the civil rights movement in America fondly and sees it as a very important victory in human rights throughout the world. Judges, business and political leaders, and religious leaders, yes, religious leaders, have been absolutely critical in this process. First, homosexual activists. I've already told you about After the Ball. It's a tough book to get your hands on, and it's very expensive. It's only hardback. I have one. It's also a tough book to read for a number of reasons, not least of which is you realize we've been absolutely manipulated. But then there's also a section in it where they say if the propaganda campaign was going to succeed, that the homosexual community needed to stop doing certain things publicly. And so its description of the homosexual lifestyle as it is and as they know it to be is quite disturbing. But that's why Kirk and Madsen argue that if our strategy is going to succeed, this stuff has to stop being so public. The moment. What was the moment? Here's why they got together in 1988, these leading homosexual activists, and it created this strategy that later became Kirk and Madsen's book. If you remember, that's the height of the AIDS crisis. AIDS, though a loose cannon, is a cannon indeed. As cynical as it may seem, AIDS gives us a chance, however brief, to establish ourselves as a victimized minority, legitimately deserving of America's special protection and care. This, therefore, is the question and the challenge. How can we surmount our insurmountable opportunity? How can we maximize the sympathy and minimize the fear? How, given the horrid hand that AIDS has dealt us, can we best play it? And that's what they did. They used the AIDS crisis to propel their movement. The method, again, from After the Ball. The campaign we outline in After the Ball, though complex, depends centrally upon a program of unabashed propaganda, firmly grounded in long-established principles of psychology and advertising. Propaganda, it's not a positive word. They acknowledge that it's not a positive word. Listen to how the authors who say this is a propaganda campaign define propaganda and the problems that people have with it. 3 characteristics distinguish propaganda from other modes of communication and contribute to its sinister reputation. What are the 3 things? It relies on emotional manipulation, it uses lies, like 1 in 10, among others, and is subjective and one-sided. This is how they describe their campaign. Relying on emotional manipulation, using lies, and being subjective and one-sided. Tell our side of the story as movingly as possible. In the battle for hearts and minds, effective propaganda knows enough to put its best foot forward. This is what our own media campaign must do. And it was absolutely a media campaign. 3-step process: desensitizing, jamming, and conversion. By the way, these are the 3 steps of brainwashing. This was their process. First, desensitizing. to desensitize straights to gays and gayness, inundate them in a continuous flood of gay-related advertising, presented in the least offensive fashion possible. If straights can't shut off the shower, they may at least eventually get used to being wet. So first, step number one, desensitize people to homosexuality. Put it out there again and again and again and again and again. And we've been desensitized, by the way. You see it everywhere. There used to be a time where if you saw, two gay characters on a show, you would say, what, can you believe this? Or on a commercial for whatever. You'd be up in arms, you'd be writing letters, and now when you see it, you've been desensitized. It's worked. It's worked. You think nothing of it anymore. You think it's natural and normal now. That was strategic. Use movies, television shows, commercials, outed actors and athletes. It's important when somebody famous outs themselves as a homosexual. It's amazing. Margaret Thatcher died and our president couldn't be bothered to show up, right? But a former NBA player came out and he was Johnny on the spot. Because that was an opportunity that couldn't be missed, okay? There was a homosexual football player in the draft last year. That was something that absolutely could not be missed. It's very important, and I'll tell you why that in particular is important a little bit later on. But the fact of the matter is, making the most of these types of things is another method of desensitizing and convincing people that it's everywhere. 1 in 10. Right? It's everywhere, every walk of life. Desensitizing is nothing without jamming. What's jamming? Well, accuse religious people. Gays can use talk to muddy the moral waters. That is, to undercut the rationalizations that justify religious bigotry and to jam some of its psychic rewards. So, portray anti-gay institutions as antiquated, backwards, badly out of step with the times, and with the latest findings in psychology. So, one of the ways you use jamming is, he says, we want to confuse the psychic rewards. So, people, nobody wants to be called a skinhead, nobody wants to be identified with the KKK, right? So what you do is, when you talk about homosexuality, and when you talk about people who are opposed to homosexuality, you identify them with skinheads and with the KKK and so-and-so. So that way, whenever people respond like they would naturally respond, the image must always be forced into their mind that they're responding like these groups that none of us want to be identified with, which is why pastors always apologize at the beginning of a sermon about homosexuality, because they've been jammed. Now, we also want to present these people as out of step with the latest findings in psychology. And so we convince people that psychology, for example, has found a biological link to homosexuality, which it has not, nor would it matter if it had. We refer to the LeVay brain study, the Bailey and Pillar twin study, Hamer's X chromosome study, Savik's pheromone study. We refer to these studies. By the way, when these studies come out, the news media presents these studies as these groundbreaking findings, and they bury the reality of what the study actually concluded, which is nothing. Nothing. We found absolutely nothing, which is quite interesting because we can't prove that homosexuality exists. We can prove that sodomy exists, the act of unnatural sex, but we can't prove that there are people who are like this by their very nature, because we've never found a genetic link. Why is that important? Because we're giving specific and special rights to a group of people that we aren't even sure really exist. We know there are people who practice this. But again, if you want to know whether or not I'm black, you can test me genetically. You can see it, right? But you can also test me genetically to find that out. If somebody says that they're part of a particular group of people, right? You can test them genetically to figure that out. Somebody says they're gay, you just have to take their word for it. You just got to take their word for it. Okay? By the way, we also have 2,000-year-old evidence that people stop it. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, such were some of you, right? There's never been a person who stopped being black. Now, here's the deal. You test Michael Jackson's DNA, doesn't matter what he did to his skin, right? We always think about that, right? But it doesn't matter what he did to his skin. It doesn't matter if a person has gender reassignment. If you were born XX, you stay XX. If you were born XY, you stay XY. Right? But this here, there are people who practice this lifestyle who don't anymore, and now they're married. Legitimately so. There's even a term for it for young lady. You ever heard the term lugs? Lesbian until graduation? It's a thing. It's a thing. So much of a thing that there's a name for it. Okay? All right. Last step is conversion. So we have desensitizing. What is desensitizing? Just bombard you with images so that it no longer bothers you anymore. You get used to it. You're not even offended by it. Your conscience gets seared. Jamming. Jamming is we present to you images. By the way, I was going to explain to you why the athletes and actors and famous people are very important to this movement, because that's part of the jamming. See, we want to think, especially in terms of homosexual men, we want to think about limp-wristed, effeminate men. Well, if a big, strong athlete comes out as gay, that jams our perception of who homosexuals are. This is why one of the ads that they proposed in after the ball was a cigarette ad, the Marlboro Man. You know the Marlboro Man, right? He's a rugged cowboy. And so the idea was we need an ad that has the rugged cowboy as being gay, because that would be another sort of ultimate jamming technique. They didn't do that ad, but they did do a movie called Brokeback Mountain, which was the exact same thing. You follow? That was jamming. Okay? All right. Last is conversion. Conversion is not about making people sodomites. Both desensitization and jamming, though extremely useful, are mere preludes to our longest, though necessarily long-range goal, which is conversion. It isn't enough that anti-gay bigots should become confused about us or even indifferent to us. We are safest in the long run if we can actually make them like us. Please don't confuse conversion with political subversion. By conversion, we actually mean something more profoundly threatening to the American way of life, without which no truly sweeping social change can occur. See, they had to send people's children home from school calling their parents bigots because they'd been desensitized and jammed and converted in the classroom and are now homosexual advocates who are calling their parents' religion and morality into question. Okay? And this is what happened. Christian families all over the Western world tell the same story of children who come back from school all of a sudden with this propaganda about homosexuality, calling mom and dad bigots, calling the church bigoted, right? It's happening everywhere. This is what was happening. Conversion. We mean conversion of the average American's emotions, mind, and will through a planned psychological attack in the form of propaganda fed to the nation via the media and the schools. There it was in 1989. Okay? Coercion. This is the ultimate end of conversion. Coercion. Expressing himself with great vigor and perhaps an extremist tone even for gay activists, ACT UP leader Steve Warren intoned an ominous-sounding alarm for religious Jews and Christians in his September 1987 warning to the homophobes. Despite the threatening tone, this was published by The Advocate, the nation's most prominent gay magazine. Listen to this. Number one, henceforth homosexuality will be spoken of in your churches and synagogue as an honorable estate. Number two, you can either let us marry people of the same sex, or better yet, abolish marriage altogether. Number three, you will be expected to offer ceremonies that bless our sexual arrangements. You will also instruct your people in homosexual as well as heterosexual behavior, and you will go out of your way to make certain that homosexual youths are allowed to date, attend religious functions together, openly display affection, and enjoy each other's sexuality without embarrassment or guilt. Number four, if any, by the way, this is to the church. Number four, if any of the older people in your midst object, you will deal with them sternly, making certain they renounce their ugly and ignorant homophobia or suffer public humiliation. Number five, you will also make certain that laws are passed forbidding discrimination against homosexuals and heavy punishments are assessed. Number six, finally, we will in all likelihood want to expunge a number of passages from your scriptures and rewrite others, eliminating preferential treatment for marriage and use of words that will allow for homosexual interpretations of passages describing biblical lovers such as Ruth and Boaz or Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Warning, if all these things do not come to pass quickly, we will subject Orthodox Jews and Christians to the most sustained hatred and vilification in recent memory. We have captured the liberal establishment and the press. We have already beaten you on a number of battlefields. You have neither the faith nor the strength to fight us, so you might as well surrender now. That's the movement, folks. That's got us kowtowing. That's the movement that's got us saying the problem is the churches haven't been nice enough. That's the movement. This is what they did to it. This was 1987, folks. This is 1987. By the way, there's a Harvard law professor who recently wrote an article saying almost the same thing just last month. The 900-pound gorilla was never going to be happy with marriage ceremonies. The church must be crushed. This is not over by a long shot. If this is right based on the premise that they argued, we must be stopped. We must be punished. This is how they must deal with us. And yet, we think if we're just nice enough. Secondly, black civil rights leaders. Julian Bond, former head of the NAACP. African Americans were the only Americans who were enslaved for 2 centuries, but we were far from the only Americans suffering discrimination then and now. Sexual disposition parallels race. In other words, gay is the new black. Coretta Scott King, the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., banning same-sex marriage is a form of gay bashing, because gay is the new black. Michael Steele, former chair of the Republican National Committee. Now, the Republicans are the conservatives in the U.S., right? Michael Steele was a black politician who was the head of the Republican National Committee. He's the guy who's responsible for helping get Republicans elected to office. He is the conservative voice, right? Listen to what Michael Steele said in GQ magazine. Oh no, I don't think I've ever really subscribed to that view that you can turn it on and off like a water tap. I think that there's a whole lot that goes into the makeup of an individual that you just can't simply say, oh, like tomorrow morning, I'm gonna stop being gay. It's like saying tomorrow morning, I'm gonna stop being black. Why? Because gay is the new black. Doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on. Judges and the courts. Jurisprudence versus social engineering. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. Although it's all I ever wanted to be. And before I started preaching and changed my major my senior year in college, I was pre-law in international business, wanted to practice international law. But you don't have to be a lawyer in order to understand what's happening in our courts. You just need to be able to read, okay? Listen to the California Supreme Court in their decision. Our state now recognizes that an individual's capacity to establish a loving, long-term, committed relationship with another person and responsibly to care for and raise children does not depend upon the individual's sexual orientation. And more generally, that an individual's sexual orientation, like a person's race or gender, does not constitute a legitimate basis upon which to deny or withhold legal rights. We therefore conclude that in view of the substance and significance of the fundamental constitutional right to form a family relationship, wherever that one is, the California Constitution properly must be interpreted to guarantee this basic civil right to all Californians, whether gay or heterosexual, and to same-sex couples, as well as to opposite-sex couples. By the way, again, the idea that sexual orientation parallels race, no evidence whatsoever to support that, okay? In fact, quite the contrary, we have evidence that it's not the same thing, but the California Supreme Court acted based on the assumption that it is the same thing. Here's the problem with that. Here's our precedent. If a lesbian is a woman who is directed toward other women in her sexual orientation, then we need to let her marry a woman, right? If a homosexual man is pointing toward other men and his sexual orientation, we need to let that homosexual man marry. If a bisexual is simultaneously pointed toward a man and a woman in his immutable sexual orientation, we need to let him marry both. You don't have to be a lawyer to figure that out. That's the can of worms they opened. Political leaders, President Barack Obama. While we have come a long way since the Stonewall riots in 1969, we still have a lot of work to do. Too often the issue of LGBT rights is exploited by those seeking to divide us, like him. But at its core, the issue is about who we are as Americans. Rarely do I agree with this man, but he's spot on in that last statement, right? By the way, he refers to the Stonewall riots. Why the Stonewall riots? Stonewall is now seen as this very important moment in the homosexual movement. As in most mafia-run joints, the Stonewall operators exploited the opportunity to blackmail successful older patrons. A staff member would strike up a conversation with a successful-looking man, learn his name and profession. If the mark worked in a law firm or was a stockbroker, he was later blackmailed with the threat of being outed to his colleagues. The discovery of this operation led to the famous Stonewall raid on June 28, 1969. Sometime in early 1969, Interpol, the UN-affiliated international police organization, noticed an unusual number of negotiable bonds surfacing in foreign currencies and requested that the New York Police Department investigate whether they were counterfeit. Police detectives found that the mafia had been acquiring large numbers of bonds by blackmailing gay employees of New York banks. This was Stonewall. I could go on, but I'll stop there. Let me say this last thing about Stonewall. Here's our president talking about a Stonewall legend. Frank Kamini, now in his 80s, a courageous gay rights pioneer and sexual libertarian of the most extreme kind, a man who wrote in 2008, "Let us have more and better enjoyment of more and better sexual perversions by whatever definition, by more and more consenting adults. And if bestiality with consenting animals provides happiness to some people, let them pursue their happiness. And let us have more and better enjoyment, more and better hardcore pornography by those to whom such viewing provides happiness." A man who stated that the God of the Bible is a sinful homophobic bigot who needs to repent. Of this man, President Obama said, "And so we are proud of you, Frank, and we are grateful to you for your leadership." The Obama LGBT agenda, I'll leave that. That was in education. This is very important. In education, Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education. Obama comes to the White House. He comes from Chicago. It's traditional that you bring secretaries of certain departments from your home state. So Arne Duncan was the Secretary of Education in Illinois. And he did a great job because while he was Secretary of Education, only 83% of the students could not read at grade level. And only 87% couldn't do math at grade level. And only 77% couldn't write at grade level. And only 84% couldn't do science at grade level. So he was awesome. And then he was brought to Washington, D.C. to be Secretary of Education for the United States of America. Obviously because he was so awesome, right? Even more astonishing, the Secretary-elect managed to achieve these arresting results by spending a modest $10,555 per pupil per year. By the way, that would be $42,220 for a family with 4 children. Imagine having that much for your homeschool budget. And results that terrible. They take your kids, right? Why is this important? He started the Chicago Annenberg Challenge. Bill Ayers and Barack Obama served together on that board. Bill Ayers, Weather Underground, okay? Bomb police stations. At least one police officer killed by he and his wife, Bernadine Dorn. These 60s radicals in whose living room Barack Obama's political career started. These guys connected to the Annenberg Challenge. Endorsed the establishment of the Chicago Social Justice High School's Pride Campus. This was the first openly gay high school campus anywhere. That's Arne Duncan. Arne Duncan comes and he's now the Secretary of Education. Now, Kevin Jennings, you need to know who Kevin Jennings is. He's the founder of GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educational Network. Their goal is to have a gay-straight alliance in every school. They're pretty close. Their strategy was to use the Safe Schools anti-bullying curriculum. The Safe Schools anti-bullying curriculum is a homosexual propaganda campaign. Arne Duncan brought Kevin Jennings to Washington as the Safe Schools czar, so he could get the Safe Schools campaign, the anti-bullying campaign, in every American school. It's homosexual propaganda. Do y'all understand what's happening here? Business leaders. Steve Jobs, the former CEO of Apple. Man, you should get you something else. You can't find a computer made by a company that is not knee-deep in the homosexual agenda, or an operating system, or anything else. Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google. I won't even read all this stuff that they say. I want to get to this. I want to get to the religious leaders, okay? Brian McLaren, we know this name, right? Listen to Brian McLaren in Christianity Today. Perhaps we need a 5-year moratorium on making pronouncements. In the meantime, we'll practice prayerful Christian dialogue, listening respectfully, disagreeing agreeably. When decisions need to be made, they'll be admittedly provisional. We'll keep our ears attuned to scholars in biblical studies, theology, ethics, psychology, genetics, sociology, and related fields. Then in 5 years, if we have clarity, we will speak. If not, we'll set another 5 years for ongoing reflection. After all, many important issues in church history took centuries to figure out. By the way, that's not true. Maybe this moratorium would help us resist the wind of doctrine blowing rigorously from the left and the right, so we can patiently wait for the wind of the Spirit to set our course. Because the Bible is obviously not clear on this issue. Gene Robinson, is that name familiar to you? The first openly gay Episcopal bishop. All right, that's Church of England on our side of the waters. People know that he was openly homosexual. What they don't know is that he was an admitted alcoholic and that he was a married man who abandoned his wife and children for his gay lover. That's the guy who became the first openly gay bishop in the Episcopal Church. He's disqualified not only because of his homosexuality, but his drunkenness and his abandonment of his family. But again, he was celebrated. The pro-homosexual strategy. Here's where the rubber meets the road, all right? And in these last minutes, let's just deal with this. Well, their strategy: ad hominem attacks, intimidation, question-begging logic, and genetic fallacies. Argument ad hominem. That's an argument against the man, okay? Against the person. And you're in the middle of a debate, and you have the stronger argument, and the person goes, well, so you're ugly. Right? That's argument ad hominem. You're a terrible person, okay? That means you're winning the debate, by the way, all right? U.S. Representative Barney Frank, he said, I wouldn't want the homosexual marriage issue to go to the United States Supreme Court now because that homophobe Antonin Scalia, who died last year, it's the worst thing he did as a Supreme Court justice, has too many votes on this current court. Now that's a member of Congress talking about a sitting judge on the Supreme Court. Notice he is a homophobe. You are a homophobe. Your position is not homophobic. Your belief is not homophobic. You are. It's an attack of you as a person. It's an attack of your character. You are a homophobe. You are not worthy of participation in this society. Okay? Begging the question. Now the phrase begging the question, we use this a lot and we just almost always use it wrongly. You know, we go, well, that begs the question. Now, what we mean is that raises the question. Begging the question refers to the question in a formal debate. That is, the issue being debated. One side may ask the other side to concede certain points in order to speed up the proceedings. To beg the question is to ask that the very point of being argued be conceded. Okay? We're arguing as to whether or not you kick your dog, right? And so I go, now, when you kick your dog, do you do it with your right or your left foot? Well, actually, that's what we're debating. If you say, when you kick your dog, you're begging the question, which means you are assuming the fact that we're supposed to be debating, okay? That's what it means to beg the question. It doesn't mean to raise the question. Begging the question is a logical flaw in an argument, okay? So, how do they beg the question? Number one, they say homosexuality is as immutable as ethnicity. Folks, that's begging the question. They're stating as fact something that we're debating that hasn't been proved. That's question-begging logic. And again, most Christians believe this to be true and factual, though it is not. How do we know it's not? Again, I told you, 1 Corinthians 6, verses 9 to 11. Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor the drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. That's 2,000-year-old evidence that people stopped practicing homosexuality. We don't even need 2,000-year-old evidence. It happens today. It happens today. Second, homosexuals are denied a fundamental right when they are not allowed to marry. That's question-begging logic. It's not true, actually. Even without the laws being changed, homosexuals have always been allowed to marry. How could they be prevented from marrying if there's no test? Right? Listen to this. This is in an article a few years ago. I'm married with 2 children. 3 years ago, I found out my husband was having an affair with another man. He still lives at home and continues his relationship with that man. I don't have it in me to throw him out and get on with my life. I'm afraid to bring up 2 children alone. That means he's a homosexual and he's married. Right? Nobody took a blood test and said, actually, sir, you can't marry her because we just discovered you're homosexual and homosexuals aren't allowed to marry. Right? A married man, Thomas Beattie, who used to be a woman, says that he is pregnant and will give birth to a baby girl in July. Take it right out of the headlines. Yeah, just try to wrap your head around that one, all right? But here's the thing. There are people who evidently were homosexuals and they were married. Yeah, but you say, but they have to marry someone of the opposite sex. Yes, which means the law is applied to them exactly as it's applied to me, and that is justice. The Iowa Supreme Court recognized this, and listen to what they did. It is true the marriage statute does not expressly prohibit gay and lesbian persons from marrying. By the way, drop the mic right there. It should be over. That means the law is not being violated, and nobody's rights are being violated, because the law is being applied equally to all persons. They just admitted it. We're done, right? No, we're not. It does, however, require that if they marry, it must be to someone of the opposite sex. By the way, same for me. So still, no problem. Viewed in the complete context of marriage, including intimacy, civil marriage with a person of the opposite sex is as unappealing to a gay or lesbian person as civil marriage with a person of the same sex is to a heterosexual. By the way, did they prove that? No. They begged the question. How could you prove that? And by the way, this is law. Who cares how appealing something is? Thus, the right of a gay or lesbian person under the marriage statute to enter into civil marriage only with a person of the opposite sex is no right at all. Because if you don't want to practice the right, it's not a right. Under such a law, gay or lesbian individuals cannot simultaneously fulfill their deeply felt need for a committed personal relationship as influenced by their sexual orientation, again, begging the question, and gain civil status and the attendant benefits guaranteed by the statute. Instead, a gay or lesbian person can only gain the same rights under the statute as a heterosexual person by negating the very trait that defines gay and lesbian people as a class, their sexual orientation. Again, they begged the question. Here's the logic. Homosexuals have the right to marry. They do not desire to exercise the right as it currently exists. Therefore, they do not have the right and the law must be changed. Can we agree that that's their syllogism? Right? I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth, right? That's what the Supreme Court of Iowa just said. That's their syllogism. So, let's take the same logic, the same syllogism. Pacifists have the right to join the military. They do not desire to exercise the right as it currently exists. Therefore, they do not have the right, and the law must be changed. We must create a military that doesn't fight so that pacifists can enjoy the right like other people can. Irrefutable logic. This is ironclad, folks. And it demonstrates the folly of what, for example, your country just did not long ago. It's absolutely ridiculous. But apparently there's nobody who can stand up in a courtroom and do this. 3, it is wrong to pass legislation that takes fundamental rights away from or discriminates against a group of people. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. Right? Where I'm from, convicts can lose the right to vote. There's a group of people who lose fundamental rights. Right? Happens all the time, folks. So they're begging the question, and it's not true. But here's the other issue. The idea is that when two people love each other, they should be allowed to get married. Right? So they're starting, with that, Beatles philosophy. All you need is love. I come back with a little Tina Turner theology. What's love got to do with it? All right? By the way, let's take that statement. First, when? We discriminate against 13-year-olds. They can get married. Right? 2, because they say when two people love each other. This is discriminatory because we discriminate against polyamory and polygamy. Right? If the numerosity requirement is there, then even when 2 people marry is a huge problem. Well, that's an exaggeration. No, it's not. I won't go into all of this, but polygamy and polyamory are coming, right? Because we've set a precedent and they're about to kick the door wide open. People, that discriminates against bestiality and zoroastrianism. What if I don't want to marry a person? So even this statement, when 2 people love each other, that's discriminating against people who want to marry a non-person. Well, that's an exaggeration, right? No. As an 18-year-old, he had stoned and clubbed to death 2 dogs he found engaging in mating. He then hung their carcasses from a tree. That's when his personal suffering began. After that, my legs and hands got paralyzed and I lost hearing in my ear, Kumar told the Hindustan Times newspaper. Kumar, now 33, living in the southern India district of Sivaganga, could no longer take the physical pain of the dog curse. So he sought the advice of an astrologer. Her advice, her cure for his maladies? Marry a dog, which is just what Kumar did on Sunday, November 11, 2007. Kumar, sitting beside his bride, recited his marriage vows, declaring, I will take care of it until its death. Then the couple was declared married. Still think it's an exaggeration? It happened. Does he now get to come to Ireland with his dog and get all the rights with it? Well, that's discriminatory. Because it's when 2 people love each other. And we said marriage shouldn't be discriminatory, right? We discriminate against 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds. We discriminate against polygamy and polyamory. And we discriminate against bestiality. When 2 people love each other, that's a discrimination against pragmatic marriages. Not everybody marries for love, right? We say when 2 people love each other, they ought to be able to get married. When they love each other. This discriminates against people with multiple love interests who choose one over the other. This anti-discriminatory statement is discriminatory at every word. The idea is ridiculous that we shouldn't discriminate in marriage. By the way, I can't get married. Why? Because I'm already married. Well, that's discrimination against me. Are you smelling what I'm stepping in? We've always discriminated against marriage. We always will discriminate in marriage. We have to, because we're civilized people. Discrimination and other laws. This is Antonin Scalia. Oh, I miss this man. The Texas sodomy law undoubtedly imposes constraints on liberty. So do laws prohibiting prostitution, recreational use of heroin, and for that matter, working more than 60 hours a week in a bakery. Laws discriminate by their very nature. The genetic fallacy. Here's the genetic fallacy. Genetic fallacy is arguing that something that something is untrue because of where it comes from. Right? It's untrue because of where it comes from. All right? You are a Christian, and you're using your religion to impose your morality on me. Sound familiar? You're a Christian. You're trying to use your religion to impose your morality on me. Therefore, what you're doing is wrong. Okay? Since your position arises from your religion, your argument is biased and illegitimate. I, on the other hand, am basing my argument on the illegitimate application of the biblical idea that all people are equal before God. However, since I do not believe in the source of my argument, the Bible, I have the moral high ground, and you have to shut up. Here's what's interesting. You're trying to impose your morality on me. What are you trying to do? I'm trying to tell you that it's immoral to deny marriage to me if I love this person, because discrimination is immoral. Based on what worldview? Because I'm going to say that's based on my worldview that you just hijacked. But because you hijack my worldview and don't claim it as your own, you get to impose the morality that you choose. And I don't get to impose the morality that I choose. You get to be declared immoral, and I get to be declared a bigot. Well, as we'd say in Texas, that dog won't hunt. And yet, it works. It works. It's got us all tied up in knots, not knowing if we're coming or going, and having absolutely no idea. All right, I'm gonna have to stop right there, okay? There's a whole other section here on our responses and whatnot. Let me just give you a couple of these things, okay? There's opposition from within. The idea that Jesus never addressed homosexuality. Paul didn't understand loving same-sex relationships. Love is the overarching ethic of the New Testament. And why do you eat shellfish? Okay? These are the 4 lines of argumentation that we deal with, all right? I'm at my hour. I can run through these quickly and try to help you address these, or you can tap out. Okay? All right, so we do this. The first one, Jesus never addressed homosexuality. Okay? Raise your hand if you've heard this before, right? Jesus never addressed homosexuality. First of all, Jesus did address homosexuality. In Matthew 5 and in Matthew 19, Jesus addressed homosexuality because Jesus addressed marriage. And he addressed marriage as a creation ordinance because God made them male and female, okay? So Jesus did address it. Secondly, Jesus is a member of the Godhead. This is hugely important. This is hugely important, which means that Jesus was there in Sodom and inspired Leviticus. The Bible is a unit, and you can't pit Jesus against Paul. Okay? So, again, this is the thinking progression that we use in order to address that argument. It's ridiculous on its face. All right? Next, what Genesis teaches about marriage. We heard that earlier, okay? Jesus echoed that teaching from Genesis. the purposes of marriage, so on and so forth. I'm sorry, I'm going through these things quickly, but you've heard these things, all right? What's wrong with homosexuality? It's a violation of the created order, it denounces procreation, and it blasphemes the illustration. And besides that, it denies the need for sanctification. The other thing is, Paul didn't understand homosexuality. Matthew Vines, does this name mean anything to you? Okay? This is the new 900-pound gorilla in the church, all right? God and the Gay Christian is his book. He's writing this book as one who believes the Bible and who is reformed and conservative, and here's the essence of his argument. Paul is arguing against sodomy. He's arguing against the Greco-Roman practice of heterosexual men using other men for sex. He's not arguing against people who have a homosexual orientation, because Paul wouldn't have understood homosexual orientation. Okay? This is the Matthew Vines argument, and young people love it. Here's why. They go to school every day, and they're told your mama's a bigot, your daddy's a bigot, your church is a bigot, your Bible is a bigot, your God is a bigot, and they get pounded every day. All of a sudden, the Matthew Vines argument comes around, and they can hold on to the Bible and Christianity and stop the bleeding at school by embracing homosexuality simultaneously. Romans 1 obliterates this, and Vines tries to deal with this in his book, but sadly so. We know Romans 1. For the sake of time, let's move. What's love got to do with it, right? It's the other argument, that love is the overarching ethic of the Bible, and these people are loving each other. Two lines of attack. First, God is love, and second, marriage is love. These are the two lines of attack. But is this love? There's the question. Matthew 22, 34 to 40. The Pharisees come and they ask him, when he silenced the Pharisees, or the Sadducees, when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. This is a summary of both tables of the law. Okay? Love is not pitted against the law. Love holds the law. Romans 13, 8 to 10. Listen to this. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandment, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. What's that? Folks, that's the second table of the law. And any other commandment are summed up in this word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So Paul, just for those of you who are saying, well, you say that that's a summary of the second table of the law, but how do we know that? Well, because Paul just said that. Okay? Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, it fulfills the law. Notice he uses the word commandment there twice. So he's talking about the 10 Commandments, and specifically the second table of the law. All right? So the idea that you would pit love against law is completely ridiculous, and it's obliterated by the New Testament. True love hates sin. True love hates sin. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 6. Love is patient and kind. Love does not boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. We're going to have a wedding. Sorry, I'm not going. You really? You're such a hypocrite. I thought you loved me, right? I'm your brother. I'm your sister. I'm your friend. And now you're not going to come because I thought you loved me. I do love you. But love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, and you're about to do wrongdoing. What's more, All love is vertical first and then horizontal. I cannot delegitimize my vertical love for the God who is love by embracing what that God says is sin. And I cannot prove my love for you by denying my love for God, because that would be idolatry. O you who love the Lord, hate evil. He preserves the lives of his saints. He delivers them from the hand of the wicked. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Though they know God, God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. This is a warning to us, okay? True love judges according to God's standard. You know, everybody knows Matthew 7:1. It's the new John 3:16. The old John 3:16 is John 3:16, right? Everybody knew that. The new John 3:16, Matthew 7:1. People don't know Matthew 7:1. They don't know the verse, but they know what's there, right? Judge not, lest you be judged. And you keep on reading, and what do you find? You find this illustration of the speck that's in your brother's eye and the log that's in your eye. How does it end? You remove the log from your own eye and then leave your brother alone, because the metaphor here is judging. No, you remove the log from your own eye so that you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye, which is a metaphor for what? Judging your brother. Matthew 7 is about judging properly. It's not about not judging, okay? True love calls the wicked to repent. Ezekiel 3:18. If I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you give him no warning, nor speak to warn the wicked from his wicked way in order to save his life, that wicked person shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at your hands. It is not loving to look at the wicked and refuse to call their wickedness wicked. Ephesians 5, we expose the evil deeds of darkness. Therefore, true love must never treat homosexuality with anything less than utter contempt and loathing. Well, that doesn't sound right. That sounds downright nasty. Notice I didn't say homosexuals. I said homosexuality. Why? Why should we have contempt and loathing for homosexuality? They have the highest rates of STDs in the world. They have the highest rates of promiscuity in the world. The highest rates of domestic violence in the world. It's amazing. Now, there's this whole domestic violence kick, and the feminists are on the domestic violence bandwagon because it allows them to advance the narrative that the most dangerous thing in the world to a woman is a man, right? Lesbian relationships are far more violent than heterosexual ones. Their rates of domestic violence are off the charts. Highest rates of alcoholism and drug abuse. Highest rates of depression. Highest rates of suicide. Males take 20 to 30 years off their life expectancy. Folks, this is not a lifestyle, it's a death style. Homosexuality is to be looked upon with utter contempt and loathing because it destroys and dehumanizes people. We cannot celebrate this. Not if you know what it is. Okay? The New Testament. Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desires, serve as an example by undergoing punishment of eternal fire. Why is this verse important? Because there are people who argue, no. Sodom and Gomorrah, they got punished because of a lack of hospitality. Yeah, Jude says otherwise. Jude says otherwise. Okay? So, why do you eat shellfish? Right? Why do you eat shellfish? In other words, why do you pick and choose? You say it's an abomination, and I like to lead people to Leviticus to talk about this issue because I want them to bring up this argument. There was an episode of The West Wing where President Bartlett is talking to a woman who's supposed to be like, what's the lady psychiatrist? Dr. Laura Schlesinger. and they're in the West Wing during this party, and he says, I like your show. I like how you call homosexuality an abomination. Jacob says, I don't say homosexuality is an abomination, Mr. President. The Bible does. Ah, yes, it does. Leviticus. Jacob's 18:22. Bartlett, chapter and verse. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. While I had you here, I want to sell my youngest daughter into slavery, as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. She's a Georgetown sophomore, speaks fluent Italian, always cleared the table when it was her turn. What would be a good price for her? While you're thinking about that, can I ask you another? My chief of staff, Leo McGarity, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police? Here's one that's really important because we've got a lot of sports fans in this town. Touching the skin of a dead pig makes one unclean, Leviticus 11:7. If they promise to wear gloves, can the Washington Redskins still play football? Can Notre Dame? Can West Point? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made of two different threads? Think about those questions, would you? This episode was so popular because it put Christians in their place, and it gave what has become the most popular line of argumentation for personal disputes with homosexuals and Christians. The why do you get to pick and choose line of argumentation. For the sake of time, and I write about this in my latest book, Expository Apologetics. For the sake of time, let me give you the answer, okay? Here's how you respond to that. And I'm really gonna shut it down here, okay? All right, we'll end with this. So I bring up Leviticus 18:22 and the abomination because I really want them to ask me this question. It's kind of like a boxing technique. There's a saying in boxing, don't hook with a hooker, okay? And it means if there's someone whose strongest punch is their left hook, and your left hook is not your strongest punch, if you rely on throwing your left hook, they're going to throw theirs faster and harder than you do. They will knock you out before your punch ever reaches them, okay? And so don't hook with a hooker, right? So if you're a person whose left hook is really strong, you may come in the ring and put your right hand down a little low to invite this person to throw their left hook. Because you know by the time their shoulder flinches, yours will land, right? That's what we're doing here. I want them to bring up the why do you pick and choose argument. I really do. So I put my right hand way down here. Like, please punch me right there, okay? And they go, oh, really? Well, you eat shellfish and you do this and you do that. Why do you pick and choose? Oh, it's interesting that you should ask. Number one, I pick and choose. Well, first of all, before we get there, let me be clear. You also pick and choose. Well, what do you mean? Well, Leviticus 19 talks about lying to your neighbor and withholding good from your neighbor, right? It talks about lying in court. You don't want any of that, right? Well, no. Okay, so you pick and choose as well. Yeah, well, I don't pick and choose because it's in Leviticus. Actually, you do. And you were raised in a culture that put that in you. The fact that you don't know you pick and choose is irrelevant. You pick and choose. So first of all, get down off your moral high horse. Because you pick and choose just like I do. The difference is I know why I pick and choose and that I pick and choose. You not only don't know why you pick and choose until I just informed you, you didn't know that you pick and choose, okay? Secondly, I pick and choose because not all laws in the Old Testament are the same. There are laws in the Old Testament that are moral laws, there are laws that are civil laws, and there are laws that are judicial laws. Now, the moral laws are forever binding on all people, so I pick and choose those laws. However, for example, I do not pick and choose the ceremonial laws because Christ died for sin once for all, the just for the unjust, in order that he might bring us back to God. Those ceremonial laws pointed forward to the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross. So as a Christian, I wouldn't dare go back to those old laws that pointed forward to what my Savior would do in order to save me from my sin. And the New Testament makes it very clear that I shouldn't. Going back to those laws would be getting married and then continuing to kiss your wife through a veil. So, number one, I pick and choose because there are different types of laws. Number two, I pick and choose because I'm a Christian, and if I didn't pick and choose, it would be blasphemous for me to go back to ceremonial laws. Thirdly, I pick and choose because it is absolutely incumbent upon me to have a standard of righteousness outside of myself, because I know that by nature I'm a hypocrite and I'm arrogant. I need a standard beyond me. I don't trust myself to be the arbiter of all truth. So there's the difference between the two of us. By the way, please note what just happened. I invited them to throw their left hook, not so that I could knock them out, but because I knew that they were going to choose to have a conversation about this issue, number one, which meant that they would stay there and listen to me while I explained myself. Number three, I'm able to knock them down off their moral high horse and show that they're not morally superior. And number four, I just shared the gospel. And that's what matters. Not winning a debate about homosexuality. Getting to the gospel is what matters. Okay? All right. Folks, I've taken too much time. There's a whole lot more of this. Some of this you can find online. Look for Semper Reformanda 2014 from our church, Grace Family Baptist Church in Houston. Did this before we had moved. So there's 3 sessions of this, 2.5 hours, 3 hours or so. Actually probably 3.5 hours of this that you can go and get. My hope, I know this is a lot, okay? But my hope is that you at least now understand the nature of what we're dealing with, okay? This was not just innocent, loving homosexuals who just found themselves, yearning to be married to one another. Nothing can be further from the truth, especially with homosexual men. They don't want marriage. That's not what this is about, okay? That's not what this was ever about. This is about destroying marriage itself, okay? And so, anyway, I hope you see that. I hope you see that this was strategic in its nature. I hope you see that it's illogical, right? Because here's what worries me. What worries me is that for most Christians, this is their posture. First of all, I'll tell you, I've been talking about this for a decade. When I started talking about this, people were like, why are you talking about this? Why are you only... I believed a decade ago that this was the most important moral issue of our day. I still believe it today, okay? And so people were like, why are you talking about this? Well, then the law comes down in the U.S., and everybody's like, where were the pastors? How come the pastors weren't talking about it? What? I've been talking about this for a decade, and you said I was obsessing. Now you're saying, where were the pastors? You weren't listening to those of us who were talking about this. You didn't get it. And now, here's what I'm seeing. I'm still talking about this, and people are like, hey man, that ship has sailed. Let's move on. So we went from apathy to fear to apathy again. And here's what you need to know. The 900-pound gorilla is not finished. They're not done with us. Okay? They're not done with us. And so we need to open our eyes and be ready for what's coming. Because our very ability to proclaim the gospel is going to be challenged. Okay? Here's the other thing. These people are trapped in a death style. And the enemy has told them that this is good and this is right. They're standing in front of the wrath of God, sticking their tongue out. The loving thing to do is not to wipe our hands of this. The loving thing to do is to proclaim the gospel to them and to warn them of the judgment that is to come. Here's another thing. God judges nations, not just individuals. He judges nations. And his judgment has already come. His judgment has already come. Okay? We're in the midst of it in the West right now. And it's not done yet. Okay? So for those reasons, This is of the utmost importance, okay? And beyond that, here's what I'm saying, and that's why I wanted to end with that. What I'm seeing is that right now, there is an opportunity to engage people like never before. People have been emboldened by this. They want to talk about this because they feel like they have a winning strategy. They feel like if they just bring up the shellfish thing, you know, they can just beat you down, right? This is an opportunity for us to proclaim the gospel. And it's a unique opportunity where people will want to talk to you about this because they think it's a winning strategy for them, okay? So for all those reasons, I think this is of the utmost importance. It's also important because our children are being desensitized, jammed, and converted. There's some of you in this room, and you have older teenage children, and they're gone on this issue. Some of you have children in their 20s and 30s, and they're absolutely gone on this issue. They are so pro-gay, you can't even stand it, because they've been brainwashed on this issue. Well, we need to understand how this happened. We need to understand how to engage on this, all right? So I apologize for just sort of flooding you with all of this so quickly and for going over the time, but I hope you understand why, and I hope you find this useful.